we're so happy Chris here.
So we joined up, they were just a whole bunch of retirees. And Lindsay has an interest in photography, which I share, although she's much better. And that is, a lot of people take pictures of landscapes, family, things like that. We're interested in the details. The closer you get, the more interesting it can become, until you enter realms that are just unknown to us. And that's where Lindsay goes. She goes to places that are going to surprise you and delight you, because they're probably in your garden right now, you just don't know it. So. Lindsay is Canadian. She lives in Kensington with her husband, and it's not 5 years old now, and I'm not going to spoil it by talking anymore. So, Lindsay Puddicombe, ready?
Ready. Yes, ready. Thank you, Dave. Oh, I do? Okay.
Okay, is that okay? Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to present some of my photography to all of you. So as David mentioned, I am Canadian, but I went to graduate school in London, and then from London moved to Ireland for a couple of years, where it rained almost every day. That's no lie. So when we had the opportunity to move to California, we were really excited for fresh food and sun, and I got very excited to learn about gardening. My first couple of years were very unsuccessful. I had never heard of compacted clay soil before. So all of my plants died. But after many years of conditioning my soil, we now have a garden full of healthy plants. And part of what I love about gardening is the creatures I find in my garden. I've always been an animal lover, but never an insect lover. Insects are ends. I love photography, I love art, and so when I was taking photographs of flowers and plants, or what I thought was just flowers and plants, it was actually many of these little guys, which was very exciting to see when I would upload my images onto my computer. And thus began my love affair with bugs and insects. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. If I'm going too fast, let me know. If I'm going too slow, snap at me, ask me any questions, whatever you need. So, all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. Often people use these terms interchangeably. I still do it. But bugs are these little green guys you see here. They have something very specific about their mouths that allows them to pierce your plants and drain them of all good things. There are lots of orders of insects, but the main ones, the ones we see a lot of, there are about 7. So we have beetles, bees, wasps, and ants. We have flies, crickets, and grasshoppers. You see mosquitoes here. We don't want them in our gardens. Butterflies and moths, and of course, our true bugs. Here, I can look at this screen because I can't read this. Now, my favorite are spiders, but spiders aren't in fact insects. They are in a classification of their own, arachnids, but they will be part of this presentation because I love spiders. Tanya and David know this. This right here is a funnel weaver spider. And I will show you another image of one later and tell you a little bit about what makes them great. So whether they fly, slither, hop, or crawl, there are so many insects who are here to help our gardens. Many maintain our healthy soil. They recycle nutrients back into the earth. They pollinate and they control all the pests that are ruining our gardens. This little nymph jumping cricket is sleeping in a daisy in this image. And no class of animal is more important to our survival, yet these incredible little tiny creatures are often overlooked, almost always overlooked. Stomped on by a shoe, swept up by a broom or a hoover, sprayed with insecticide. And their diversity is unparalleled. There are over 1 million species of insects. And without these important creatures, global ecosystems will crumble. So I hope that I can shift some of your views on some of the little creatures you see in your gardens. Because any shift, big or small, toward respecting, admiring, or taking care of these life-sustaining insects is a win, not only for our gardens, but for life as we know it. So the following presentation will take a photographic journey through East Bay Garden, my garden, and it's going to show you who is there to help, and I'm also going to show you who's not so helpful. And just to be clear, there are a couple of photos that were taken at Lake Garden and not my garden. So, who is important? Of course, bees. But there are so many species of bees. I love all of them. I sit in my garden and get to know them. The honeybee is one most of you are probably very familiar with. They're important pollinators. They're important for preventing soil erosion, creating medicines, and promoting biodiversity. We attract honeybees and lots of other bees by planting flowers that have nectar and pollen, but you want to make sure you're planting flowers that are colors the bees will respond to. So blues, purples, reds, yellows. Those are the most important. Those are the colors the bees will see, and I can tell you why. So if you want to attract bees to your garden, plant those flowers, give them some drinking water. I usually get a low clay pot, put some rocks in it, and put about 1 inch of water. I change it every day when I remember. And they can stand on the rocks, take a drink of water, and most insects will use this. In case you're not familiar, soil erosion is the wearing away of the nutrient-rich topsoil, and bees help pollinate plants, and they increase plant growth and plant diversity, which ultimately can stop soil erosion. This is a little green metallic bee. They are itty bitty bitty tiny bees of the sweat bee family. Very cute. So just a little bit, I'm not an entomologist, but a little bit about flower color. These two honeybees, both on purple flowers, is because bee vision is optimized by the UV spectrum, something we don't see with our eyes. And these flowers, angiosperms, seed-producing flowers, have nectar guides, almost like bullseyes on them. And so purple, red, blue, yellow flowers produce these UV bullseyes for bees that guide them directly to the part of the flower that has the most nectar. It's this incredible symbiotic relationship between the plant and the bee, where they both benefit, and it's just this incredible part of nature that I've loved witnessing. So some of it, I won't have information on every page. I'm going to just show you some images with the hope of bringing some beauty and understanding of how I perceive these creatures. Another little fuzzy honeybee. Yeah, they are very cute. If you need me to go back to an image or have any questions, just let me know. And one quick thing about watering your garden. Bees and other insects typically don't like to be wet. It slows them down and limits their ability to get away from predators. So if you can, water your garden in the morning or at night when bees aren't active. This poor little guy needed to take a rest. This is a sunflower bee, a solitary bee, not aggressive at all, and they pollinate all kinds, every kind of sunflower. And just sort of a friendly, non-aggressive species of bee. This is an urbane digger bee. Has anyone seen a digger bee before? These big green eyes, super fuzzy. They're sort of like a teddy bear of the bee family. Here it is sleeping on not a leaf, but like a stem, and it doesn't sleep in its nest, just the female does, and it uses its sharp mandibles to latch onto a stem where it can sleep. And they're called digger bees because they dig in the soil, and that's where they have their nests. And they're generally not aggressive unless the female has come out of the nest and they need to protect the territory, and then they're aggressive sometimes toward other bees in a way of sort of buzzing them. And there's another one just so you can get a sense of a digger bee's face. These ones, though, are a little bit aggressive, not necessarily to humans. This is the wool carder bee, and they're fascinating. I like them and I like watching them, but the male wool carder bee is super territorial. It sort of buzzes around what it has claimed its territory and will body check any other bee or hoverfly in its vicinity. Except for the females, it has allowed to use the flowers, and it will allow the female to use the flowers if the female will reproduce with it. So this bee has a lot to learn, but this is a female collecting the soft fibers from a plant, and she carries it back to where she's creating a nest and lines the cells with these soft fibers, which is super cool. And she was just working so hard, so I sat for an hour watching her, and she'd collect and fly back and forth, and it was just very amazing to see.
Chat. What are you using?
Yeah, so I use a macro photography lens, so I use a 100mm lens. Right now, I don't use any tripod or lighting source except for natural light. I think I started one summer trying to learn and it just became a headache for me, but I think I'm gonna go back to it. But I use a Canon Marquee with a 100mm lens, which is a relatively easy lens to work with. This is a yellow-faced bumblebee. This is another California native bee, which is a good point if you want to attract bees to your garden, plant native plants. Bumblebees particularly love poppies, which is interesting because they don't get nectar from poppies, they just get pollen. But I have found bumblebees sleeping in poppies before, which is very cute. So these are sweat bees. This is a sweat bee taking a drink of water. So it sort of looks like its entire face has opened up to let in this one drop of water. This is a very teeny tiny bee. So having water sources is really important. And the next two are also sweat bees. They're the little itty bitty teeny tiny bees you see drinking nectar and collecting pollen around your garden. You can see all the pollen attached to the fur. And then there's leaf cutter bees. They look similar to honeybees, but as you can see in the front here, they've got very sharp mandibles. And so if you ever go into your garden and you see leaves that have really neat, tidy cuts of them, sometimes triangles, that's because a leaf cutter bee has come to clip some of your leaf to bring back to create its nest. Another species of leafcutter bee. It's very tiny, this one. So that's bees. Another very important creature to have is hoverflies. Hoverflies are a mix between a bee and a fly. Sometimes you don't know if it's a fly or a bee. One way you can tell is their eyes. It's not a bee because they have these big front eyes and they hover when they fly. So they zip fast and then they stop, and then they zip fast and they stop. And some people suggest that's because they want to look for a food source. So these are great because they're beneficial as adults and as larvae. The adults are pollinators, and the adults also, as you'll see shortly, seek out colonies of aphids, insects we don't like, to lay their eggs because hoverfly larvae eat aphids. So hoverflies are great to have in the garden. And you would encourage them in your garden in a similar sense to how you encourage bees. Plant lots of nectar-rich flowers, limit pesticide use, have water sources. But hoverflies especially like plants with flat tops, like yarrow, zinnia, and daisy. So here is a hoverfly targeting aphids. So it will lay its egg somewhere along this stem, and then the larvae will start to eat these aphids. Yay. Well, sometimes I just sit, I will sit for a couple of hours. This particular spot in my garden, I didn't know anything about aphids and that whole cycle with different insects. And so I allowed a portion of my garden that had cosmos and some zinnias. I can't remember something else. I let them just get infested with aphids because I wanted to watch what would happen. And so I did, and I think I have a photograph later of ants appearing, if anyone's ever seen ants appearing. Yes, that was interesting to watch. I didn't know anything about ants farming aphids, but there you go. And so that is a hoverfly larva eating aphids. So, yay, hoverflies. And then there's just some images of hoverflies up close. You can see these amazing compound eyes. So they like flowers with lots of nectar. This image I love. I just love the color, but also this is a pink rock purslane, so pretty small flower, about that big, and only about 3/4 of the flower in the image. And so you can get a sense of how small these hoverflies are when you imagine the flower being that big. And that's the hoverfly. And this is a margin clear for hoverfly. And hopefully you can see the amazing pattern on its back. So hoverflies and bees are incredible pollinators, both super important. I think the bee was named the most important animal on Earth. I think it was 1 in every 3 bites of food we take is because of bees, while hoverflies are probably a close second. They're extremely important. And while they aren't as hairy as bees, they work faster and visit more flowers. So both extremely important. So this is an interesting creature. This is a robber fly. This particular one is a bumblebee mimic robber fly for obvious reasons. I was astonished the first time I saw one. I'd never seen it before. I said to Maud, who is my daughter, look, it's a bumblebee, but look. And then I got closer and I saw its eyes and I said, wait, that's not a bumblebee. So I took a couple photographs and lo and behold, it was a robber fly. But these guys are good because they eat wasps. Yay, we had a wasp issue in our garden this summer, which is not great for the 5-year-old. And they eat stink bugs and predatory beetles. So they eat all sorts of good stuff that you don't want in your garden. And their larvae, yep,
Are you talking about yellow jacket?
wasps. Yeah, I haven't seen them eat anything yet. I've only ever seen a robber fly twice. So I'll have to look up specifically. I don't know if they're specific in what species of wasps they eat, but I can find that out for you. Their larvae are also really important because they live underground and will eat eggs, larvae, and soft-bodied bugs, as we learned, like plant hoppers. They really like soft, dry, sunny areas. So you might see these guys in fields, which is where I saw them. So they like big sunny spots that are not damp. So if you want to attract robber flies, that's the kind of garden they're looking for. And they also, although they eat all these nasty bugs and insects, they also want to supplement with nectar. So nectar-rich gardens. Long-legged flies are important. I know we don't want flies in our gardens. But these in particular, if you see flies that have long, sort of dancer-like legs, these are the ones that are okay. Because the adult, this is an adult here, is teeny tiny, like a grain and a half of rice. But they will eat nasty things like white flies and spider mites and aphids, which is really great. We want everything that will eat those creatures. So if you see these adults, just leave them. Flies like green bottle flies, you can shoo away, but these will actually help your garden. And some are scavengers, so they will eat dead matter and recycle nutrients back into your soil, which is also really important for our gardens. And of course, like everything, you can attract them by limiting pesticides and leaving them a damp, so unlike the robber flies, they like to have a bit of a damp space to create their homes. So leaving fallen leaves and bark, grass clippings will help attract long-legged flies. Dragonflies, of course, we all know, I believe we all know, are great. And they eat mosquitoes, my least favorite thing on earth. So if you want dragonflies in your garden, which I'm sure many of you do, they are aquatic. So having some source of water is crucial, but I would say mind your water because water does attract mosquitoes and that's where they like to lay their eggs. And so having moving water that you can change daily would be very important because while it's great to have dragonflies, you don't want to negate that by attracting all sorts of mosquitoes. And they like black-eyed Susans and meadow sage. Damselflies are also important for the same reasons dragonflies are important. So very similar, they love to eat mosquitoes. And these little guys are so amazing to watch because they will catch their prey right out of midair if they have to, which is just this incredible thing to watch. Sadly, I have yet to capture an image of a dragonfly or a damselfly catching something midair, but I'm on a mission. Parasitic wasps. So I was going through this presentation with Maud, and she was asking me, what are the baddies and what are the good ones? And when I said parasitic wasps, she automatically thought baddie. I said, no, goodie. Because parasitic wasps, as you can see, eat aphids. Yay! They also lay their eggs on common garden pests like the tomato hornworm. And then the tomato hornworm will eventually die because the parasitic wasp eggs drain it. So it's it's a double goodie. If you see them, this is what they look like. They don't look like a typical wasp. They have these sort of long, curvaceous bodies. They're very elusive. They don't like attention. They don't want to be near you, so they'll be hiding in shrubs and bushes. If you're quiet enough for long enough, maybe one will appear, like it did here. But generally, it's hard to find them unless you have an aphid infestation. And then they will stop briefly, grab some aphids. They will not eat them on site. They will fly away. But please do encourage parasitic wasps. They like yarrow, Queen Anne's lace, cosmozinnias, fennel, dill, and allium. Ladybugs, I'm sure a lot of you have heard are very important for our gardens. They eat aphids, as do their larvae. I actually think their larvae eat more aphids than they do, so encouraging both is really important and hugely beneficial. They will also eat other garden pests like spider mites and whiteflies and mealybugs. So if you see ladybugs in your garden, it's probably a good sign that you're creating a healthy, balanced ecosystem. And we just like them. We like to have them. If you want to interest kids, having things like ladybugs and butterflies are good things. Ladybugs will let you pick them up and they'll crawl on your arm. So for me, it's been important to encourage ladybugs so that Maud is more engaged with what's going on. And there's a little ladybug larva, a voracious eater of aphids. Soldier beetles. Has anyone ever seen a soldier beetle? This is what it looks like. They're actually good. At first sight, you would think maybe they're not. They are, in fact, good. Because they eat garden pests, which is ultimately what we want in our gardens. And because they fly, they're also pollinators. So you want these little guys in your garden. You see them, just leave them alone. They don't really want to be near you anyways. So they're not going to bother you. They're not aggressive. They're not going to bite you. Leave patches of undisturbed soil. I just try to do that in case bumblebees want to, have their nests in our garden. But leaving patches of undisturbed soil is good to attract a lot of different insects, soldier beetles being one of them. And this one is called a downy leather-winged beetle. It's a type of soldier beetle. Assassin bugs. I know it's an intense name. This is a pale green assassin bug, and it is a fierce predator, and it will eat some of the bigger, nastier pests like tomato hornworms, while also eating smaller pests. So having assassin bugs is great. They're also elusive. They're really hard to see. They blend in with their environments. But they're attracted to light, which is something I just learned. So having solar lights in your garden will attract them or help to attract them. So that's an idea if you're thinking this might be a great bug to try or insect to try to attract. And they like prolific flowers like marigolds and pansies. And of course, butterflies. Butterflies are pollinators. And I put here, they bring a sense of joy, which I think they do for people of all ages. They're just whimsical and colorful and interesting to watch. And they're also excellent bioindicators. They're super sensitive to any change in the environment. And so if there are butterflies in your garden, that's a really, really good indicator that you have a healthy garden with a balanced, thriving ecosystem. So I'll just go through a few images of butterflies here. This is the tawny crescent, and then a cabbage butterfly, a marsh fritillary, loved my marigolds that summer. It's got a very cute face. This is Maud's favorite, the American Lady. And a common buckeye. And a Gulf fritillary. So we had lots of butterflies in our garden last year, which was a great sign. Of course, a monarch. So skippers are actually kinds of butterflies. I think it's only been recent that they've been categorized as kinds of butterflies. But at any rate, they are also pollinators, and their caterpillars are not pests, which is always great. This is a tropical checkered skipper, and you would attract them in a similar way that you would attract other butterflies, which is having lots of flowers. They particularly like cone-shaped flowers, aster, milkweed, of course, for monarchs. And they also, I found in my garden, really like salvias and lavender. So lacewings are incredibly important. They were an experiment of ours last summer. They're beneficial as adults and as larvae. They both eat pests, aphids in particular, and the adults also eat a variety of pests like leafhoppers and white flies. You can attract them with beneficial plants like dill, fennel, yarrow, cosmos, and sunflower. Last summer, I decided I'm not going to use any sprays. I want this garden to sort of help itself. And so we ordered some green lacewing larvae and aphidolytes from this company. And they were reasonably priced, and they came promptly, and we released them into our garden. So they come as eggs, and so once the eggs start to hatch, you just let them free in your garden. And the idea is then they take care of your aphid problems, which worked. So I would highly recommend them. I can go back and send this website to anybody who might be interested. Mantises are also very important for pest control, and they also eat bigger pests like moths and beetles. But they like shade, so if you can provide plants that provide shade, that will help attract these guys. That they also use shaded areas to molt, so they go and hang upside down, so they want privacy. So any big bunched shrubs that will provide shade is great for these ones. And now my favorite, spiders. This is a bold jumping spider. I haven't always liked spiders. I wasn't verbally scared of spiders, but I have grown to very much love them. These jumping spiders are pretty small. This bold jumping spider was maybe 2 keys. So a bit bigger than the ones I typically photograph, but they've just got these really amazing eyes with such depth. And the more they get to know that you're going to be there, the more likely they are to just come out and look at you and check you out. They're not aggressive, as most spiders are not. They're very shy and like to be left alone. This is a trash line or weaver spider. And they catch flies and wrap the flies up. What's super interesting about these spiders is they then leave a line, as maybe you remember seeing one of the first images, called their trash line. So their dinner remains. And the reason they do this, they also collect little bits of leaves and other debris as a way to hide from predators, to confuse predators. Because truly, I can attest to this, it's almost impossible to determine which is the spider and which is the trash. And so it's this really amazing thing they've developed. And so here's one. This is after she's done eating and she's bringing it over to put in her trash dash line. This is a funnel weaver. They love eating flies. So spiders just generally are so important because they will eat mosquitoes and flies and aphids. Anything you don't want, they are happy to take off your hands, and they don't take up much space, and they really don't want to bother you. So here's one. What it does, its web is not sticky, so it relies on its speed. It runs out, bites the fly, and then drags it back into its web. That's sort of like this amazingly deep funnel. And there's a jumping spider eating an aphid. Look at that. It's doing such a service to your garden, not being scary at all. And there's a crowned orb weaver, also eating a fly, just a green bottle fly that we don't want around. These are more elusive, and I have yet to see one eating anything, but it's a garden ghost spider, and they're almost translucent. They're pretty interesting. These spiders are probably the smallest of the spiders that I photographed. They are so tiny, it's hard to sometimes even see them. They look like a little speck. And here's one eating a marsh fly. It was just hiding on the itty bitty flower. I barely noticed it. I think I'd been sitting there for a good 15 to 20 minutes, staring almost directly at it, not recognizing that it was in fact a spider, which is also good to remind us that just being aware and gentle when we're in our gardens is important, because there's so much life around us. And a wolf spider. I know they have these ominous names, assassin bug and wolf spider. Wolf spiders are very shy. They live sort of in the undergrowth. They're amazing moms. They carry their young on their back, and they eat pests. So we're nearing the end of the beneficial bugs and insects. Pill bugs are a weird one for me. So they started out being very beneficial because they eat dead plant matter. And so they clean up our gardens. Hooray! But last summer, we had an incredible amount of pill bugs. Out of nowhere, it seemed, and there wasn't enough dead plant matter to feed them. And so they started eating our new plants. And every day I would go up outside and I would lift the petunias, and sure enough, there would be 50 pill bugs. And I'd scoop them up and I'd throw them into the ivy in the front. And the next day, I would lift up the petunias. And so they can become a pest. So it's really important to be aware of the pill bug population in your garden. Yes. Well, we don't know. This picture is a mystery, and we have yet to find out what this pill bug is doing. I saw it one day, and it had another pill bug, and it was spinning it around. And then it would stop, and the little goldish pill bug would stretch out, and then roll back up, and it would start spinning it around again. I thought, I have no idea what's going on. So I took some videos and I took some images and I sent it to the camera club, and people said, oh, it could be a young, no, they suggest things not correct. So then I reached out to some foremost experts in terrestrial arthropods, as one does. And we still don't know. That's it. We still do not know. So I may have discovered a new behavior. I don't know. If I find out, I will let you all know. And it's scavengers. And so having some flies in your garden is okay because they are scavengers. So they eat dead matter, which is really good for your soil. Breeding beetles, blowflies, flesh flies, and yellow jackets. We don't really want a lot of them, and it's okay not to have a lot of them. Having some is okay, and it's a good thing for your soil. So having talked about a lot of the good stuff, we're gonna quickly go through and tell me if I'm just going way too long here. I'll quickly go through the bad stuff. So this is, I'm gonna give you the life cycle of a stink bug. If you see these eggs, get them out of there because they're about to hatch into these little baby stink bugs who will eventually look like this, who is still a young stink bug. This one just molted, and then will eventually look like this, an adult stink bug. And they are not good for our garden. That being said, a few of these, a few plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, stink bugs are totally fine. Everything in moderation, as they say. But if you start to see more and more of these, it's not a good sign. These little green plant hoppers, they pierce your plant, the leaves or the stems, and they start sucking out all the good stuff. This is a plant hopper nymph. This nymph is a baby. Looks a bit alien-like, mod-like, so because it has firecrackers, which, you know, is sort of correct. That cool little firecracker coming out of its behind is actually this wax-like substance that it can spread almost fan-like when it feels like it's under threat. And so it tricks a predator into thinking that's really a part of the bug. And so the predator will bite it, but it's just some waxy spindles and they can afford to lose those. They don't feel it. And so it's this amazing defense mechanism. But they eventually look something like this. Sharpshooters, they are everywhere. You don't want a ton of them. I think they're cute, so I usually let them be unless I start seeing tons of them. But just the same as any other bugs, they just start to deplete the good nutrients from your plants. Here's a little potato leaf hopper. I mean, these are so itty bitty, you really need to start training your eye to look for them because they're so incredibly small. That's smaller probably than a grain of rice. But once you start noticing them, you will always notice them. There's a Japanese leaf hopper. And there's the ever disliked aphids with an ant farming them. So you all sort of laughed when I asked if anyone knew about ants and aphids. So I don't need to go into detail here, but I was shocked that ants farm aphids and so aggressively that they will take their wings away so the aphids can't even escape. They're trying to leave your plant. Amazing. There's an aphid. That's a tomato hornworm. Every time we plant tomatoes, we find them. And this is what the parasitic wasps will lay their eggs on. But if you see one, you don't need to wait for a parasitic wasp. You can just pick it off and get rid of it because it will destroy your plant pretty quickly. Tarnished plant bugs are fine if you see one or two, not fine if you see tons and tons of them, depending on the size of your garden. Cute little spotted cucumber beetles, also not good. Raspberry beetle, not sure how it got into our garden because we don't have blackberry or raspberry plants. But there it was. This is a light brown apple moth. I just liked this image, so I wanted to include it. So I put it near the end, and Maud asked, is that a baddie? Oh, I'm sure, sweetie. It is, it's a baddie. So I added it to the baddie area of the presentation. It will deplete, it will latch into trunks and stems and leaves and deplete. So although it's doing a great job at finding light and photographs well, you don't really want it in your garden. This is a tobacco budworm, and as you can see, it's destroying the verbena, as are these geometer moths, ruining my poppies and petunias. This was interesting. I watched it for a while. It was chewing up the plant, and there were these little orange bits around the plant. And it every so often would stop and lean over and pick one up and move it. Also, have no idea what it is doing. I can get back to you on that as well. Who knows, some of these creatures. Okay, so the last little bit, I just wanted to include a few images that I like that sort of demonstrate the beauty and complexity and intricacies of these tiny little worlds happening in our gardens, in our spaces that we share with them. This is a crab spider. It is eating a hoverfly, boo. But what's interesting about this teeny spider is that it has color changing abilities. So it is yellow here. Its resting color is white, but it hides in these flowers, typically purple flowers or yellow flowers, and it changes color so as to not be noticed. And it waits for unsuspecting pollinators like this hoverfly. And here's one that's beginning to turn a more purple shade. Just really amazing. Here's some little bush cricket nymphs. It's also not great to have a ton of crickets and grasshoppers. Some are okay. And they like to sleep in daisies. So if you have daisies, sometimes they are in purslane, and sometimes they are in primrose. This is a fork-tailed bush katydid that I rescued. It had lost a leg, so Maud and I brought it inside for a couple weeks to nurse it back to health. And there it is on release day. So I'm sure lots of you who garden have seen these giant clusters of spit on your leaves and your plants all the time. That's this little guy, the meadow spittlebug nymph. And it's living under there, and those bubbles come from its behind. So it takes water from your plant, which is not super damaging. So seeing the clusters of spitballs actually isn't a big deal. It's pretty okay. If there are a ton of them that are about to turn into adults who want to do more damage, that's not great, but just seeing the clumps of spit is not a big deal. So they take the water from your leaves and they create these bubbles that cover them and sort of sustain them. They protect them, they keep them moist, they hide them from predators until they're ready to turn into that. And that is no longer called a spittlebug because it doesn't live in spit. It's called a frog hopper because it can jump really high and far like a frog. Also, don't want to see a ton of these in your garden, but a few are okay. Carolina leaf roller, which we only ever have one in our garden. And Maud requested I put this image in of a hoverfly flying. It's a good demonstration just of how big the garden is compared to these little friends. Here's some of my favorites. Honeybees was sleeping in this poppy. They like to sleep in flowers, take rest, so just leave them. They need to rest too, because they look cute. The checkered click beetle. This beetle is pretty harmless. If you see hundreds of them, that's probably not good, but if you see a few of them, your garden is safe. This is a bottle fly. We don't like bottle flies. They always want to land on my dog's poop. But I wanted to include this because just the amazing complexity of their faces and eyes is just incredible to me for such a small little creature. Flies can be good though, because they eat other flies. So they're not always bad. And this is a milkweed bug, so if you want monarchs, then you need to have milkweed. And if you have milkweed, you will attract milkweed bugs, and they're totally fine and don't do anything to the plant. This is a snipe fly. It's a very harmless fly, sort of looks like a mix between a bee and a fly. There's a male and a female trash line or weaver mating in midair. Yep.
Just a question, how would you differentiate, an orb weaver from a trash line orb weaver? Just from the trash line, or is there any other?
Yeah, well, I use a insect identification app always. Because there are different characteristics to all orb weavers. These ones, the conical, they have this sort of hump at their back, comes up like this, almost like a cone. But I do use a bug identification app, which is really great and gives you so much information. And then if I'm not sold by that, then I'll just Google something. Ladybugs mating. Ladybugs are avid maters. There's a bee fly, also a good pollinator, nothing to be scared of, won't sting you. There's just such incredible diversity, and we have a teeny tiny little garden, so when you think about what's out there in other people's gardens and in other states and countries. This common house spider we found underneath Maud's little mini trampoline, and she was so fierce in protecting her egg sacs and just wouldn't leave them no matter what. And ants, I'm sure you've all seen them moving their babies when they've been inadvertently sprayed by a hose. So whether they help or hinder, it must be acknowledged, in my opinion, that these tiny creatures really are magnificent. And so I'm ending with just a little jumping spider. So that's it. I hope I didn't go too slow or fast. Thank you. Does anybody, I'm not sure how this works, but does anybody have any questions that are? Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
Like the I'll bring it back up. So she said I should include like a baby, a larva ladybug. So I'm just gonna go back to it in case anybody hasn't seen one before, right there.
So this is it right here. Yeah. Yeah. So they're important because they eat more aphids than the adults do. Did anybody have any? I think I saw somebody else. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yes. That's a great question. Oh, she'd like to know how you get the link to the place where I bought the lace wings and fiddlies. So how can I?
Well, we've recorded the meeting, we've recorded the presentation, so it'll be on our YouTube channel, which I'm sure you all watch regularly.
You can also take down my email address if you want.
And we'll try to add it to the newsletter. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so in planting tomatoes, let's sit back down. In planting tomatoes, where does that tomato hornworm come from? It's a great question. I don't know. You know? Sphinx moth. Yes. Sphinx moth. Yeah. I know every time we plant tomatoes, it shows up. And they're really fun to photograph, but they destroy plants so quickly. Oh, yes. Yes, they certainly do. Yes, we've seen that before. Are there any other questions? Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Could you stop the recording, please? Thanks, unless there was more from the chat, Chris, or